Body of Lies by David Ignatius, narrated by Dick Hill. Copyright 2007 by David Ignatius. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with David Ignatius and the Saghalin Literary Agency, and was produced in the year 2007 by Tantor Media, Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. Body of Lies. For Eve. To mystify and mislead the enemy has always been one of the cardinal principles of war. Consequently, ruse de guerre of one kind or another have played a part in almost every campaign ever since the episode of the Trojan horse, or perhaps even earlier. The game has been played for so long that it is not easy to think out new methods of disguising one's strengths or one's intentions. Moreover, meticulous care must be exercised in the planning and execution of the schemes. Otherwise, far from deceiving the enemy, they merely give the show away. Lord Ismay, foreword to The Man Who Never Was, 1953. It took nearly a month to find the right body. Roger Ferris had very particular requirements. He wanted a man in his 30s, physically fit, preferably blond, but certainly and recognizably Caucasian. He should have no obvious signs of disease or physical trauma, and no bullet wounds either. That would make it too complicated later. Ferris was on assignment in the Middle East most of the time, so it fell to his boss, Ed Hoffman, to manage the details. Hoffman didn't trust his colleagues to locate a body without thinking they had to notify a congressional committee or otherwise botching the job. But you could find someone in the military who was willing to do almost anything these days. So Hoffman contacted an ambitious colonel on the J-2 staff at Special Operations Command at MacDill Air Force Base in Florida, who had been helpful on other matters. He explained that he needed a favor, and an odd one at that. He required a white male, approximately 6 feet tall, early middle age, muscular enough to be believable as a case officer, but not so muscle-bound that he looked like a trigger-puller. The ideal candidate would be uncircumcised, and he had to be dead. The colonel found the body 3 weeks later in a morgue in South Florida. He had tapped a network of retired officers who were working private security and claimed they could get anything done. The dead man had drowned the previous day while windsurfing off the Gulf Coast near Naples. He was a lawyer on vacation from Chicago. He was physically fit, brown-haired, disease-free, and in possession of a foreskin. His name was James Borden, and he was, or had been, 36. The body was altogether suitable, except for one detail. It was due to be cremated at a funeral home in Highland Park, Illinois, in 2 days. That presented a challenge. Hoffman asked the colonel if he had ever staged a black bag job, and the colonel said no, but he was game for anything. That was a sentiment Hoffman rarely heard at CIA. They worked up the body snatcher's version of a 2-card Monte. One corpse went into the cargo hold of the airplane in Fort Myers, and another one came off at O'Hare. The coffin was the same, but the man inside was now a 78-year-old retired insurance executive who had died of a heart attack. The colonel sent an NCO to the funeral home in Highland Park to make sure nobody decided at the last minute on a public viewing. They had prepared a cover story in case something went wrong, about how the airline had made a terrible mistake and confused 2 coffins in transit, but now it was too late because the other body had been cremated in Milwaukee. But they never needed to use it. James Borden's corpse wasn't perfect, but it was close enough. The upper body was muscular, although the tummy had begun to sag, and he had a bald spot at the crown of his head. It turned out that he had an undescended testicle. The more Hoffman thought about these imperfections, the more he liked them. They were the real, human details that would make the larger deception believable. Perfect artifice includes mistakes. To this corpse, Hoffman now attached a legend. He became Harry Meeker, not James Borden. They rented Harry Meeker an apartment in Alexandria and got him a home phone and a cell phone. Using the picture from Borden's Illinois driver's license, they obtained a Commonwealth of Virginia license, and then a passport, and then a man in support dummied up the right stamps and visas. For the passport photo, Hoffman's colleague Sami Azhar hacked into the website of Borden's law firm and got a portrait of him that had been used in the firm's promotional mailings. Harry Meeker's cover job would be with the U.S. Agency for International Development, so they got him a USAID identification card. They had business cards made up, too, with Meeker's private phone extension. It had the right prefix, 712, but when you rang the number, the recording sounded hollow, not quite the voice of a real secretary, but more like someone who was covering for Meeker. They gave Meeker a parking space beneath AID's headquarters in the Reagan Building on Pennsylvania Avenue, with a reminder card for his wallet in case he forgot the number of the space. This was the easy stuff, no more than the agency usually did in building integrated cover. Now, they had to make Harry Meeker a real person. Harry needed clothes. Hoffman was oblivious to fashion and wore whatever his wife picked out at Target, so he was the wrong person to go shopping. Azhar was dispatched to Nordstrom's. That seemed to have the right, upwardly mobile, Northern Virginia feel. Stylish, but also safe. The mental picture they had developed of Harry Meeker was of a rising CIA officer on the staff of the Counter-Terrorist Center at headquarters, a mid-career guy trying to make his bones, a guy with smarts who had some Arabic and the savvy to handle a sensitive case. They didn't know yet exactly where the body would end up, but it would probably be somewhere along the northern frontier of Pakistan, where it could get cold. So Azhar bought a medium-weight blazer, a pair of pleated Dockers woolen slacks, a white shirt, but no tie, a pair of rubber-soled shoes that would be suitable for trekking and city wear. He took the clothes to the cleaners several times until the sheen was gone, but the shoes were a problem. They looked too new, even when they had been deliberately scuffed. Shoes needed to feel as if real, sweaty feet had been in them. Azhar wore them for a week, with an extra pair of socks, so that he wouldn't get a blister. And what of the inner life of Harry Meeker? Ferris had already decreed that he should be divorced. That was the one biographical detail anyone would assume about a CIA officer, that he had dumped his first wife, and now he screwed around. To suggest the divorce, Azhar drafted a letter from a lawyer representing Meeker's imaginary ex-wife, Amy, directing him to send his alimony payments to a new address and warning him not to contact Amy in person. Was Meeker a shit, or had his wife taken up with someone new? It worked either way. Now Harry Meeker needed a girlfriend. She should be pretty, sexy even. Everybody had seen James Bond movies, including jihadis, and people would just assume that a real American spy must be banging a hot chick. Hoffman wanted a picture of a blonde with big tits in a bikini, but Azhar said that would be too obvious, the Pamela Anderson thing. They should make her sexy, but someone who could work for the agency, too. Ferris had a clever stroke. The girlfriend should be African American. That was just unlikely enough to be totally believable. Hoffman suggested his secretary, a cocoa-skinned beauty with a dazzling smile. He asked if she would mind posing for a picture in a low-cut blouse. Her name was Denise, which seemed about right, so when the picture was developed, Hoffman asked her to write on the back, "I love you, baby, Denise," with a little heart. Ferris wondered about a love letter, but decided that would seem phony. People didn't write love letters anymore. They sent emails. Harry Meeker wasn't going to be carrying a computer, but Azhar suggested text messages on Meeker's cell phone, and that seemed perfect. They sent two from Denise's phone. One just said, "Sweet sugar." The other said, "Baby, come back. I miss you too much. XXOOD." Sexy, not slutty. Hoffman said Harry should have a condom in his wallet to suggest that maybe he was getting a little on the side while he was away from home. The cell phone was a challenge. Azhar programmed Denise's number and the headquarters number at USAID, and then added a number for an imaginary other girlfriend he called Sheila, and one for an imaginary friend, Rusty, whose number was actually Azhar's home phone. To throw in some raw meat, Azhar called the Meeker cell phone from several different extensions at CIA, with the recognizable 482 prefix. He put some other teasers into received calls and dialed numbers. A couple of restaurants in McLean near agency headquarters, several Pentagon numbers, one from the U.S. Embassy in Islamabad, another from the U.S. Embassy in Tbilisi. Everyone's cell phone is a digital record of his life. You wouldn't have to spend much time with Harry Meeker's phone to suspect that this man was leading a secret existence. They dressed the corpse one day in late fall in a cold room Hoffman had built specially for the purpose under the CIA's north parking lot. Harry's skin was yellowing ivory, the color of a fading neon light, ice cold to the touch. The hair was a little shaggy, so they trimmed it almost to the scalp to give him a Bruce Willis look. Harry lay naked on the gurney, undescended testicle and all. "Jesus, put some fucking clothes on this guy," said Hoffman. He suggested briefs, but Azhar cocked his head and said, "I think not." So they found a pair of well-washed boxers and pulled them up around his waist. They pondered for a minute whether Harry would wear an undershirt and decided, no, too prissy. Putting on the shirt and trousers was easy, but the shoes were difficult. The feet were rigid from death and the cold, and they didn't bend at the toes or ankles. Hoffman sent a secretary out to buy a portable hair dryer, which he used to warm the feet just enough to make them pliable. Finally, they added the pocket litter, the little bits of paper in the pockets and the wallet that would make Harry Meeker convincing or give him away. They had a charge slip from Afghan Alley, a restaurant in McLean frequented by CIA officers on their lunch break, charged to Meeker's Visa card. Hoffman added a second charge from the agency's favorite expense account restaurant, Kincaid's Colvin Run Tavern in Tyson's Corner, nearly $200 for dinner for two. Maybe Harry was getting serious about Denise. Ferris supplied the card of a jewelry store in Fairfax with the handwritten notation, 2 carat, $5,000? Harry was thinking about getting engaged, but worried about the money. Azhar suggested a receipt for dry cleaning at a Parks Fabric Care in the McLean Shopping Center. People always forgot to pick up their laundry before going on a trip. And a receipt from the Exxon station on Route 123 just before the entrance to headquarters. That was a nice touch. So was the coupon for a free car wash at a gas station in Alexandria, near Harry's apartment. Hoffman wanted to give Harry an iPod, and they debated what sort of music their imaginary case officer would like. But then Azhar had a brainstorm. They shouldn't download music onto the iPod, but an Arabic language course. Whoever found the body would spend hours puzzling over the phrases, wondering if they were a secret code, and then realize it was just a language lab for spoken Arabic training. That was precisely what an ambitious, self-improving case officer would be carrying with him, so earnestly, annoyingly American. Hoffman had an old ticket stub from a Washington Redskins playoff game, and he put that in one of the jacket pockets, too. They would add the finishing touches later, the documents Harry Meeker would be carrying to his contact in Al-Qaeda, the photos and cables that would explode like virtual time bombs as they made their way up the network, the evidence that the enemy's cells had been turned and betrayed. What they were constructing with such care was a poison pill, one wrapped so believably and tantalizingly that the enemy would swallow it. The poison pill was Harry Meeker, and he could burst every node and capillary in the body of the enemy. But first, they had to swallow the lie. Chapter 1. Berlin. 4 days after the car bomb exploded in Milan, Roger Ferris traveled to Berlin with the chief of Jordanian intelligence, Hani Salam. The message traffic back at Amman Station was a digital blizzard, with the 7th floor screaming for anything on the Milan bombers that the director could take to the president. But they were always screaming about something at headquarters, and Ferris thought the trip with Hani was more important. In this instance, Ferris turned out to be right. Ferris had heard stories about the prowess of the Jordanian intelligence service. CIA officers called them the Hearts, partly because of their cryptonym, QM Heart, and partly because it fit their style of operations. But it wasn't until the Berlin trip that Ferris really saw the Hearts in action. The pitch wasn't anything very fancy. The setup had taken months of planning, but in the moment of time in which it played out, the operation was simplicity itself. It was a question that had only one answer. Ferris didn't give much thought then to the complexity that lay beyond his vision, the maze that was so perfectly constructed you didn't think to ask whether it was perhaps inside a larger maze, the exit path that was so brightly lit that you didn't think to wonder whether it was really an entrance to something else. They made their way to an apartment building in the eastern suburbs of Berlin, a district that had been mauled by the Red Army in 1945 and never fully recovered. A pale October sun gave a faint metallic wash to the clouds, and the cityscape was the color of dirt. Mud-brown plaster on the walls, oily puddles that filled the potholes on the street, a rusted old Trabant parked along the curb. Down the street, some Turkish boys were kicking a soccer ball, and there was traffic noise from Jakobstrasse a block away, but otherwise it was quiet. Ahead was a grim block of flats built decades ago for workers in the nearby factory. They were now urban ruins inhabited by immigrants and squatters, and a few aging Germans who were too dazed or demoralized to move. The smells coming from the few open windows weren't of cabbage or schnitzel, but garlic and cheap olive oil. Ferris was just under 6 feet, with bristly black hair and soft features. His mouth fell into an easy smile, and there was a sparkle in his eyes that made him appear interested even when he wasn't. His most obvious flaw was a limp, which was the result of an RPG that had been fired at his car on a road north of Balad in Iraq 6 months before. Ferris had been lucky. His leg had been raked with shrapnel, but he had survived. The Iraqi agent driving the car had died. They say that good intelligence officers are gray men, the people whose faces you forget in a crowded room. By that measure, Ferris was in the wrong profession. He was hungry and impatient, and looking for something he didn't yet have. Ferris followed behind Hani and his assistant, Marwan. They stepped carefully around the trash overflowing the dumpster in the alleyway and made their way toward the back door. The wall was smeared with fat block letters of graffiti written in a mix of German and Turkish. The word next to the door looked like Allah, or maybe it was ABBA, the Swedish rock group. Hani put his finger to his lips and pointed to the windows on the 3rd floor. Through the stained brown curtains you could see lights. The target was home. But that was no surprise. Hani's men had been watching the place for several months, and they didn't make mistakes. Hani Salam was a sleek, elegantly dressed Jordanian. His hair was a lustrous black, too black for a man in his late 50s, but the mottled gray in his mustache gave his age away. He was the chief of the General Intelligence Department, as Jordan's intelligence service was known. He was a commanding, well-spoken man, and people usually addressed him by the Ottoman honorific Hani Pasha, which they pronounced with a B sound so that it came out Basha. Ferris had found him intimidating at first, but after a few weeks he began to think of him as an Arab version of the lounge singer Dean Martin. Hani Salam was cool, from the glistening polish of his shoes to the smoky lenses of his sunglasses. Like most successful men of the East, he had a reserved, almost diffident demeanor. His smooth manners could seem British at first, a remnant of the semester he had spent at Sandhurst long ago. But the bedrock of his character was the generous but secretive spirit of a Bedouin tribal leader. He was the sort of man who never told you everything he knew. Hani had joked once, when he was giving Ferris his first tour of the GID in Amman, that Jordanians were so scared of him they referred to his headquarters as the Fingernail Factory. You know, these people are very foolish, he had said, with a dismissive wave of his hand. Of course, he didn't allow his men to rip people's fingernails out. It didn't work. The prisoners said anything to make the pain stop. Honey didn't mind that people thought him cruel, but he hated the idea they would think him inefficient. Honey explained to Ferris at that first meeting that when he had a new Al-Qaeda prisoner, he would keep the young man awake for a few days in the interrogation room the Jordanians called the Blue Hotel, and then show him a picture of one of his parents or a sibling. Often that was enough. The family can do what 1,000 blows from the prison guard cannot, Honey had confided. They undermine the will to die and reinforce the will to live. People back at Langley always described Honey as a pro. There was something condescending in that, like white people describing a well-spoken black man as articulate. But the plaudits for Honey masked the fact that the agency had come to depend on him more than it should. As acting chief of station, Ferris was supposed to establish rapport with the head of the liaison service. So when Dean Martin himself had personally invited him 2 days earlier to join him on an operation in Germany, it was a big deal. The paper pushers in the Near East Division had objected that he should stay at his desk and answer cables about the Milan bombing, but Ed Hoffman, the division chief, had intervened. "They're idiots," he said of the subordinates who had tried to block Ferris's trip. He told Ferris to call him when the operation was over. The Jordanian eased open the back door and waved Ferris and Marwan forward. The passageway was dark. The walls smelled of mildew. Creeping on the toes of his German street loafers, Hani ascended the concrete stairs. The only sound was the smoker's wheeze of his lungs. Marwan went next. He looked like a street tough who had been cleaned up for Ferris's benefit. He had a scar on his right cheek next to his eye, and his body was as lean and hard as a desert dog's. Ferris followed. The limp was almost imperceptible, even though his legs still hurt. Marwan was carrying an automatic pistol, its outlines visible under his jacket. As they climbed the stairs, he took the pistol out of its holster and cradled it in his hand. The three stayed close, moving in unison. Hani froze when he heard a door opening on the floor above. He motioned to Marwan, who nodded and steadied the gun against his leg. But it was just an old German woman heading out with her cart to go shopping. She passed the three men on the stairs without looking at them. Hani continued up the stairs. All he had told Ferris back in Amman was that he had been preparing the operation for many months. "Come and watch me pull the trigger," he had said. Ferris didn't know if Hani and Marwan were actually going to shoot someone. That would be illegal, technically, but headquarters wouldn't mind if he wrote the report the right way. They weren't so fussy about that kind of thing anymore. America was at war. In wartime, the rules are different. Or at least, that was what Hoffman was always telling him. The Jordanian motioned for them to stop when he reached the third floor. He took a cell phone from his pocket, put it to his ear, and whispered something in Arabic. Then he nodded for them, and the three crept toward the door of the apartment marked 36. Hani knew that Mustafa Karami would be there that afternoon. Indeed, he knew nearly everything about him. His job, his habits, his school friends when he was a boy in Zarqa, his family back in Amman. He knew what mosque he prayed at in Berlin, what cell phone numbers he used, what hawala wired him funds from Dubai. Most of all, he knew when Mustafa Karami had gone to Afghanistan, when he had joined Al-Qaeda, who trusted him in the organization and who communicated with him. Hani had gone to school on him, so to speak. And now it was graduation time. Marwan raised his pistol as Hani approached the door. Ferris remained in the shadows a few yards back. He had his own pistol in a shoulder holster under his coat, and now put his right hand on the pebbled metal butt. Upstairs, in another apartment, he heard the faint jangle of Arab music. Hani raised his hand to signal that he was ready. He knocked once loudly on the door, waited a moment, and then rapped again. The door opened a crack, and a voice grunted in German. "Bitte?" Karami had a chain on the door, but he peered warily through the opening. He tried to slam the door when he saw the strange faces, but Hani quickly wedged his foot in the way. "Hello, Mustafa, my friend," said Hani in Arabic. "God is great. Peace be with you." Marwan poised his legs so that he could kick down the door if he had to. "What do you want?" answered the voice inside the apartment. The chain was still bolted. "I have someone who wants to talk to you," said Hani. "Take this phone, please. I promise you, it is only a phone. Don't be afraid." He handed the cell phone slowly through the crack in the door. Karami didn't touch it at first. "Take the phone, my dear," said Hani softly. "Why? Who is calling me?" "Talk to your mother." "What? Talk to your mother? She's waiting on the telephone for you." The young Arab put the phone to his ear. He listened to a voice he had not heard in 3 years. He had trouble understanding at first. She was telling him that she was so proud of him. She always knew that he would be a success, even when he was a boy in Zarqa. And now he was doing great things. He had sent her money, and a refrigerator, and now even a new television set. With the money, she would be able to find a new apartment where she could sit in her chair and watch the sun set over the hills. She was so proud of him, now that he was a success. He was a great son, thanks be to God. He was a mother's dream. He was God's blessing. She was crying. When she said goodbye, Mustafa was crying too. From the joy of hearing his mother, certainly, but also from the torment of knowing that he was caught. "You are your mother's dream," said Hani. "What have you done to her?" Mustafa brushed the tears from his eyes. "I did none of the things she said. You tricked her." "Let me come in, so we can talk." Mustafa waited, as if trying to imagine some means of escape, but already he was in Hani's power. He unbolted the chain and opened the door. The 3 men entered the room. It was eerily empty of furniture or decoration, with only a mattress against the wall and a prayer rug angled toward Mecca. Mustafa's gaunt body was slack and crumpled, like a discarded suit. "What do you want?" he asked. His hands were shaking. "I have helped your mother," said Hani. He loomed over the younger man. He did not have to state the obvious corollary that he could hurt her, just as he had helped her. "You tricked her," repeated Mustafa. He trembled slightly as he said it. "No, we have helped her. We have given her many gifts, and we have told her that these gifts come from her son, who she loves. This is a hasana that we have done, a good deed." Hani let the words hang in the air. "Is she in prison?" asked Mustafa. His hands were still shaking. Hani handed him a cigarette and lit it. "Of course not. Did she sound like she was in prison? She is happy, and I would like her to remain so, all her days." Ferris watched, wide-eyed, from the corner. He didn't move a muscle, for fear he would break Hani's rhythm. His employers had paid for this show, in a manner of speaking, but he was just a member of the audience. The silence stretched for many seconds as Mustafa contemplated his predicament. They had his mother. They had made him a hero. They could destroy him and his mother if they chose. These were facts. "What do you want me to do?" Mustafa asked at last. Ferris strained to hear the Arabic, to make sure he caught every word. He had a feeling that he was watching the one-time performance of a masterpiece. Hani had not touched his target, or threatened him openly, or even pitched him, really. That was the beauty of the operation. Hani had built a sluice down which his prey was being carried involuntarily, inexorably. "We would like you to help us," Hani said. "And it is very simple what you must do. We want you to continue your life as before. We do not want you to be a traitor or a bad Muslim, or to do anything that is haram. We only want you.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?